Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you to a special event commemorating the 50th anniversary of the discovery of Lucy and the 100th anniversary of the discovery of the Taung Child. My name is Lauren Schroeder. I am an associate professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Toronto and a research associate of the Human Evolution Research Institute at the University of Cape Town. And I will be moderating this event today. The Taung Child and Lucy are well known and well studied and are two of the most significant hominin fossil individuals ever to be discovered. They have contributed immensely to our understanding of human evolution, but they've also been at the center of many debates and controversies in the history of paleoanthropology. The Taung Child was discovered in 1924 in a limestone quarry in the town of Taung in South Africa. It is a well-preserved skull and endocast of a juvenile individual of Australopithecus africanus that's estimated to be about 2.8 million years old. The Taung Child was the first fossil evidence to show definitively that early human ancestors had evolved in Africa, overthrowing the then prevailing view that human origins happened in Europe. Lucy, on the other hand, was discovered 50 years later, in 1974, at the site of Hadar in the Afar region of Ethiopia. Lucy is classified as Australopithecus afarensis, an early hominin species that lived around 3.2 million years ago. Amazingly, about 40% of Lucy's skeleton was recovered, making her one of the most complete early hominin skeletons ever found. This completeness has been significant for our understanding of the morphological traits that are associated with bipedalism, and studies of Lucy's skeleton provided crucial evidence of early evolutionary changes in our lineage. Now, in today's event, we will be going beyond the facts that we can read about in scientific journal articles or on the internet. Instead, what we're going to do is explore these two important discoveries in the context of the past, present, and future directions of the discipline. We will talk about the context and history of these discoveries, the impacts that they had both on science but also society in the past as well as present, and how they influenced narratives of human evolution. We will end with a panel discussion of the future of paleoanthropological research and lessons that we can learn from Taung Child and Lucy. So on that note, it's time for me to introduce our esteemed speakers today. We are so lucky to have with us Dr. Dipuyo Khotleng, Director of the Paleo Research Institute at the University of Johannesburg, who will discuss the discovery of the Taung Child and the historical South African context of this discovery. Next, we have Dr. Denise Su, Associate Professor in the School of Human Evolution and Social Change, and Research Associate at the Institute of Human Origins at Arizona State University, who will speak about the discovery of Lucy and its scientific context, specifically how the discovery sort of changed the public's awareness of paleoanthropology. Afterwards, we have a core business executive at the National Heritage Council in South Africa, Dr. Miriam Tawane, who will share current perspectives on the Taung Child and also how it is viewed by communities, especially in the town of Taung itself. And then finally, we have Dr. Johannes Haile Selassie, the Virginia M. Ullman Professor of Natural History and the Environment, and the Director of the Institute of Human Origins at Arizona State University, who will focus on Lucy and highlight her impact on growing community participation as well as interest in the discipline. And then I think we're going to have a link below, but you can read more about our speakers on the main event page. If you're watching live, feel free to post your questions in the chat at any time throughout this event, and we'll answer them during the Q&A session. This program is presented by the Institute of Human Origins, the Leakey Foundation, and the Paleontological Scientific Trust. These three organizations are united in their focus of advancing the understanding of human origins through scientific research and education, while also promoting global leadership, public engagement, and the use of evolutionary science to address social issues. And you can check out the amazing work these organizations do to learn more. And then finally, we'd also like to thank the Anne and Gordon Getty Foundation, Camilla and George Smith, and the Joan and Arnold Travis Education Fund for their generous support of this program. Okay, so enough from me. It's now time to delve into the past and learn about the historical significance and implications of these fossils. So first, we are going to welcome Dr. Dipuyo Kgotleng, who will talk about the Taung Child.
Thank you, Lauren. I think in the interest of time, I'll just get into it. My name is Dipuyo Kgotleng. I'm the director of the Paleo Research Institute at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. And I'm going to take you through the historical context of the discovery of the Taung skull. And I think most of us are aware of the scientific discovery and what has been presented in archaeology, in paleoanthropological journals. But today we're just going to go into the background as to what was going on in Taung at the time of the discovery. Let's just give you a context. At the time, South Africa had just undergone, was formerly known as the Union of South Africa. And at that time, it had undergone through the Native Land Act of 1913, in which the majority of the population were now going to be only occupying 7 to 13% of the country, and the 87% was going to be occupied by their white counterparts. So this was when the Land Act was enacted. And at that time, then that meant that Taung was under a native reserve, the native reserve that formed part of the 7%, and which later became 13% of the whole country. But at that time also, let's be aware that Taung had undergone a lot of natural catastrophes. It had undergone droughts. It was going through locust plagues, which actually affected the agricultural subsistence farming that a lot of the locals were reliant on. And that led to a number of laborers who had been relying on becoming laborers in farms, now opting to become laborers in mines. And as you are aware, at that time there was lime mining operations undergoing in the Taung area. Let's talk about the chronology of the discovery. One thing about the chronology of the discovery that people might not be aware is there was a number of characters involved in its discovery. And in most cases, when you think about these discoveries, we think of one individual. We think of Raymond Dart. Raymond Dart is the one that made the discovery of the Taung skull. However, it was a sequence of events that led to Raymond Dart having access to the skull. And I will not go through all the names, but from the mine manager of the Linemex to the director of the mine works, who showed it to his son, the son who showed it to one of Raymond Dart's students that you see to his left here facing us, Josephine Salmons. Josephine Salmons showing the skull to Raymond Dart. So immediately with the slide, you get to understand that there was a number of characters that were involved in the discovery. Not only first, before the discovery of the skull, these individuals were showing Raymond Dart fossil monkeys that were being discovered during the blasting of the lime mines in Taung. However, another character that comes to play here is Robert Burns Young. After Raymond Dart realized that there was a number of fossil specimens coming out of the Taung site, he asked his geology counterpart, Professor Robert Burns Young, who was then the head of geology, to bring as many fossil specimens that he discovers during his geology expeditions in Taung. And one peculiar day on 28 November of 1924, Robert Young brought a number of boxes with fossil specimens to Raymond Dart's attention. And it was then when Raymond Dart realized out of all the specimens that he had been receiving, there was one that was peculiar, with a larger brain case and with a different morphology from the other fossil Cercopithecoids that he had been getting from the site. And that was how with that discovery, he realized one of them was actually the specimen was encaged in pressure, and legend has it he used a hammer and a chisel from a local hardware store. So much for scientific rigor, and also got another legend has it that he got a needle that he from his wife he borrowed, and then he sharpened it just to break apart the pressure, the hard matrix that was covering the fossil skull. But while it was crumbling away, then it got to reveal that this was actually a human ape. And in 1925, it was announced to the world. What is important about this is that Raymond Dart had created an individual legacy. With the discovery, with the announcement in Nature, an individual preeminence was created. So we are now, that's hence we are here today. We understand about Raymond Dart being discoverer of Taung skull. However, as I indicated in the previous slides, there was a number of characters. And what kind of impact did it have on the discipline? What are we talking about when we're talking about Raymond Dart being discoverer? We're talking about rights. I mean, who has right to the discoveries? Founders, keepers, and who are the founders? Is Raymond Dart the founder? Is he the founder of the specimen? Is it the laborers who were working, blasting out in the mines? Is it Izod? Is it Robert Young? Is it Simmons who actually alerted Raymond Dart that actually there's a site that is producing fossil specimens? That calls to question as to who has rights to these specimens, access. Raymond Dart, after the discovery and post the publication in 1925, he went on a global expedition to explain this discovery and to get his colleagues in London to assess the specimen. But then this calls also the issue of fraternization within the science. We only allow people within our small groups to have access to the raw materials, to have access to the heritage, and what about the people who are outside of those scientific fraternities? But also another thing that leads to question is the evidence that Raymond had presented was it sufficient to get into this enormous assertion that this is actually a fossil hominin. This is actually a brand new genus and a brand new species of hominin remains. But one thing for sure about this discovery is that it formed the foundation for paleo research, not only in South Africa, but within the whole of Africa. That is a widely accepted notion, but also it is also accepted that it challenged the location of the evolution of humans. It has been set firmly in Africa at that time. It then became accepted, but there are still those questions that remain. But the impact to the local community, what kind of impact did that have? Obviously, Taung has now been, 1924, Taung becomes known in the global map, global scientific map as the location for the discovery. However, the mystery is not a single mention is made of the local community in those manuscripts. We are not aware what is going on. First and foremost, as I indicated, with those lime mining operations, the likelihood of Spears himself being the one who blasted out these fossil specimens is very low. The likelihood is that the local workers who are located in the mine at the time are the ones who blasted out. So who are the real discoverers? We are not aware. So that also calls into question the othering of those people who were part of and parcel of this discovery. This is a chain of events. However, when the story starts at the mine director showing this to a mine manager, the story does not start where it was blasted out, which is the real location of where the story should be starting. So there's a lot of characters that I believe within the story have been wiped out of history. The same precedent was set with Raymond Dart now. During this discovery, he started gaining even political eminence. I mean, he started getting recognition from the political elite of the country. And one such character that is consistently named in association with him is Jan Smuts, who was not yet the prime minister at the time in 1924, but was about to become the prime minister. And he afforded these expeditions and these research with funding, but also he was able to influence to have a colleague who was then based in Stellenbosch University, Robert Broom, to also be appointed at the then Transvaal Museum. So you see the kind of influence that comes also with these discoveries, that you get recognition even beyond the sciences. and he was able to have this colleague placed in a museum. And this also then led to other events with the discovery of Paranthropus robustus, 1938 in Sorkrans, and later with Mrs. Bless in Sterkfontein. What I want to say is that after the discovery of Mrs. Bless, then apartheid was installed into legislation, but then it calls into question some of the events that were going on. That was also post in the 60s, the 70s, the height of paleoanthropological and archaeological expeditions in South Africa, but then there was a lot of other things going on in the background with regards to race and science. And I see that I'm about to run out of time, so I will quickly go into this, that how science was used in South Africa to even at some point when we were moving away from our apartheid persona, moving into a democratic South Africa, that we were able to use science to create a new identity for the country. But then what are the major lessons? The major lessons that I wanted to leave with you all today is that paleoanthropology is a multidisciplinary endeavor, and there's the danger in having only one individual presented as an eminent individual within a scientific endeavor, because there are a lot of parties involved that are never mentioned. And also with Raymond Dart and how he unearthed and broke apart the pressure, it calls into how currently we have moved away from this amateur style methodologies to professionalization of the discipline. And also, we should not always forget, while paleoanthropology always sees itself as being devoid of politics and not participate, we see how much that has an impact in the discipline. And there's been a number of things that have happened, and I hope while we're going ahead with the program, we'll have a further discussion about how ethics have played a role in this discipline, and how currently things are happening that we really need to bring to the forth ethical considerations when we're doing the science and when we are practicing it, not only for our own good, but also for the public good and for the good of the heritage of not only our country, but for the good of the global heritage. And I think I'm going to stop my presentation here in the interest of time. And thank you to Kim and to Ariel and to the Leakey Foundation and PAST for their support and for inviting me to come and give this presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Dipuyo. This is amazing. Okay, we need to move on. So we are now going to welcome Dr. Denise Su, who will turn our attention to Lucy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the context of Lucy's discovery, and also sort of kind of external events that might have shaped a little bit how things went, essentially, and what information got disseminated to not just the general public, but also the scientific community. And before I do that, I just want to talk about sort of discovery of Hadar as a site, because I think we're all pretty familiar with discovery of Lucy, the specimen. Now, Hadar was discovered by a geologist, not a paleontologist, Maurice Tayeb. He was working on his dissertation starting in 1966, which is when he started exploring the exposures around the Awash River. And so he transected the entire length of the river. And he got to sort of the Hadar region, and he saw fossils there. And so that was really sort of how Hadar itself was discovered. And he went back to Hadar with Don Johansen and Yves Coban to do a survey in 1972. They did a full field season in 1973, where they found the knee joint. And then in 1974 was, of course, when Lucy was discovered. And so when they found Lucy, what did the landscape look like in terms of our knowledge of human origins? Well, this is what we know now, right? Lots and lots of species all over the world. And so we have multiple species at different time. Human origins, the knowledge of our fossil record goes back to over 6 million years. So we know quite a lot about the human fossil record right now. But this is what it looked like when they discovered Lucy. There are only a few species known, and in Africa, there was just a few from Eastern Africa, and then also, of course, from South Africa, as you've heard, Australopithecus africanus. And so this is the context in which sort of Lucy emerged. from the sediments, so to speak, that there wasn't very much information, that there were only a few sites that were being systematically studied. And the sort of the thought at the time was that our brain came before bipedalism. I mean, these are our two defining characters as modern humans, right? We have this enormously large brain and we walk on two legs. And so the thought was always that the brain development started first, and then bipedalism came after. And at that time too, as you've heard, the oldest hominin known was Australopithecus africanus, represented here on this slide by the Taung Child. And it was thought that, the species was no more than 3 million years. So old, of course, but not old. And also at the same time, when Raymond Dart published the Taung Child, he proposed that these open savanna environments with patches of woodland led to the selection of human-like traits, such as bipedalism and larger brain. And this is a concept that's now sort of ingrained within the field, known as the savanna hypothesis. So what did Lucy tell us? Well, it was very clear that Lucy had a suite of bipedal adaptations in her pelvis, especially in her femur. But she still had this really small brain. And so this suggested, of course, that bipedalism came before large brains, and it actually arose before 3 million years. Now, what about the habitat that Lucy was found in? I actually, in preparation for this presentation, I went back to read the original geology publication associated with the publication of Lucy. And it's this really amazing detailed work on the geology of the site. And Tayeb and co-authors talked about the rich and diverse faunal assemblages that they found, but it wasn't studied yet, okay? That it merited further study. And at this time, so after they published this, in 1981, there was a moratorium on field research in Ethiopia. And that moratorium lasted until 1990. Now, why is this important? Well, not much research happened during that time, okay? So I'm gonna take you out of Ethiopia, out of Hadar for a moment and go to Laetoli. This is a site in Tanzania. This is a site that was worked on by Mary Leakey, and she visited Hadar in 1974. And she decided after that she was going to go and revisit and rework Laetoli. She had visited Laetoli on several occasions in the 30s and the 50s with her husband, Louis Leakey. But she decided she was going to work at Laetoli systematically. She brought her hominid fossil hunters with her to Laetoli, and they found fossil hominids. And so they started working there in earnest, doing full field seasons. And in 1976, they found a trail of hominid footprints. And so she worked there until 1981. And in the meantime, she and her team of scientists was working on the geology, the fauna. So, really doing very detailed, in-depth research on the site. And so during this time, right, that there was a moratorium on research in Ethiopia, this was happening in Tanzania. And they published their monograph in 1987. And it's a fantastic piece of work detailing different taxonomic groups, describing them. And in it was, they talked about how Laetoli was a semi-arid open savanna, much like modern day Serengeti. Now, this picture, savannas are actually a variety of different habitats. It describes a variety of different habitats, could be quite wooded too. But this is the picture that people thought of when they thought of Serengeti. And so this really cemented for a lot of scientists that hominins evolved within this type of open habitat. Now, what we know now about the Hadar paleo environment is that it was a fluctuating environment through time. it was moderately wet and closed to wet and open to more open and arid habitats. So not that picture of that really dry and open environment, right? And so this is just sort of a very quick illustration, really, of how outside influence certainly can impact science and sort of what gets put into not just a public consciousness, but also the scientific consciousness. And so, and there's been a lot of debate about the Savannah hypothesis for quite a while now. It's still ongoing to a certain extent. But the consensus really now is that hominins were evolving these kind of very mosaic habitats that could be quite wooded, could be quite wet, could be dry. And that this is something that, we think about, that if Haterpil environment was really well studied early on and came out around the same time as Laetoli, that then we may have had a different set of discussions in the 50 years then. So Lucy told us that Bipilzin came before large springs and arose before 3 million, and that afferents lived in a diverse habitat in conjunction with other afferences sites. So what did Lucy inspire? I mean, clearly she inspired, thinking about Laetoli, right? She inspired survey exploration at new sites, new exposures. She started new questions about human evolution. And then Johannes is going to talk about the next two things more, because it wasn't just the science that she influenced necessarily. It was also beyond the science. Scientific ideas and thoughts. It was about developing a local research infrastructure and also nurturing a whole new generation of Ethiopian scientists. So I'm just going to end there, and thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Denise. This was fascinating. And thank you both, Denise and Dipuyo, for these presentations. Both presentations touched on the context of discovery of these fossils, which of course is super fascinating. And so before we move on to the next section, I would love to kind of get both of your thoughts, and we'll keep it short because we have time at the end for more in-depth discussion, but short in 2 sentences on the following question. So what is the most important takeaway from each of your presentations in terms of the intersection of the discoveries with the scientific and or the cultural biases of their time? So let's start with Dipuyo, and then we can move to Denise.
With regards to the scientific biases, my takeaway, and based on my presentation also, is that the thing about our science is that we try to create eminent characters with our discoveries. The discoveries come and you get to find out that this one individual was the one who made the discovery, who made the announcement. However, what goes on in the background is a much bigger picture than that. So that's my main takeaway, is that with a multidisciplinary discipline like the paleosciences, it is difficult to have one individual having this multiplicity of expertise. So we always need to make sure that with regards to the discoveries, with regards to such high-profile research, we allow and emphasize the impact and the role that other players had. And I think I'll stop there, Lauren. I don't want to take too much
absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. And Denise?
I think it's important to remember that science is a process done by humans, right, within a bigger context. Nothing is done in a vacuum. And so I think that, it's important to remember that science can be an influence, whether it's the, timing of discoveries or, by external factors that we have very little control over. And the history really plays a huge part, I think, on how things develop and the kinds of interpretations that we might make.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks so much, Denise and Dipuyo. Okay, so it's time for us to move on to the next section. And now it's time to look at the present. So basically, what are the current implications of these fossils for society and for science? What have we learned from them? And so to answer these questions, we have Dr. Miriam Tiwana, who will talk about the Taung Child first.
In South Africa, it is evening, hence I'm going to say good evening to everybody who's attending. I know it is still early hours in the other side of the world. My name is Miriam Tawana. I'm currently acting as sort of a general manager at the National Heritage Council. And I'm just going to take you through the current events, what is happening right now, just sort of the status quo. The outline will just me taking you through the locality, and I think our previous speaker has done that, and just few changes within the South African education policies and look at the infrastructure development of the site so far. The site in question that we are speaking about, the site that really we discovered the Taung Child at, it is located in South Africa. South Africa has 9 provinces, one of the provinces being the Northwest Province. And it is located in one of the districts, which is Dr. Ruth Sehomotsi Mompati. And when you look at the locality, most of the time you will hear us referring to the Greater Taung local municipality. That's where it is located. It's actually where I come from. The picture just show you the distance from my home village, which is Upper Majakgoro, to the heritage site. Which is in Buxton. Otherwise, others still refers to it as Norlem or Tabasigwa. Just a brief history. Dr. Hotling has delved into this a lot. I'm not going to do this. We first started having a mine in existence, and then we had a national heritage site. The site was declared a national heritage site in 2002 under the South African National Heritage Resources Act. And then now it is an extension to the World Heritage Listing, and this happened in 2005. The common name for the heritage listing is the Cradle of Humankind. Of course, it is inscribed as the fossil hominid site of South Africa. And with this listing came several changes. I'm just going to share a little bit of the changes that really took place within the education policies. This is just a summary of what I just said. Zooming a little bit into Taung. Taung is situated in the greater local municipalities. I've said it composes of 106 villages. It is mostly a rural place. And additional to the political structure in place, it is governed by 3 traditional councils, being Baklapin, Bakapudu, Hutswana, Bahamutibi, Bahamaidi. It is a place that has been riddled with several socioeconomic challenges, mostly also at the time of the discovery, and still they are still facing those challenges. The discovery did take place when the Native Lands Act was being implemented, and that came with people being displaced around the country. The Taung population at the time probably relied on agriculture, but because of the several disasters that took place, there was a shift into dependency on mining. Then hence, I probably, during that time, I believe an average person in Taung was not earning a salary that they could sustain themselves with. And the situation has not yet changed at this moment. Did the community know about the discovery when it took place? We really cannot say majority of the population knew about the discovery. Those that knew about the discovery might have been those that were working in the mines. And the situation, to be honest, it has not yet changed at the moment. The people who knows about the community, about the discovery in Taung, they will not tell you the exact information about what is it that the Taung skull represent. We still have a knowledge gap regarding the discovery of the skull, 100 years in counting. The scholars are the ones that can tell you with certainty the information regarding the Taung skull, because now evolution is part of the curriculum. This is just to show you that socioeconomic status of Taung has not yet changed much. Probably it has become a little bit worse off. When you look at unemployment in the area and you look at the sector of employment, the situation in Taung, it is a place where the town is riddled with unemployment and poverty. And a lot of this has sparked discussions around the communities. There is still that view from local communities that the return of the skull will probably boost in majority of the economy. But there is also another factor that contributes to these discussions that are taking place regarding the skull. The one be how we discuss it. We as academics, we are referring to the skull as our human ancestor because of what it has contributed to the human evolutionary lineage. When you speak about ancestor, we translate it to Setswana, means badimo or Sekgolwane or Madlosi. In African context, that means your forefather. That means somebody who have a direct lineage towards you. So majority of the people of Taung, when they say bring back the skull, mostly it is for that connectivity that they feel ritually in an African context, that somebody who has passed on ought to be in their place of origin, to be respected and to be among his people. I did mention that we will speak a little bit about the national curriculum. A lot of had to change. Evolution was included in South Africa, not only because of the discovery of the skull. Taung skull started the discussion. It gave us a lot of evidence regarding the discovery. But now, with the discoveries that took place in Sterkfontein, evolution was included as part of the national curriculum in 2008. But during that time, there was still a little bit of resistance towards the subject, but now there is that acceptance of the subject between the scholars as well as the communities. And these are just some of the subjects that they do take. The one that I highlighted more is number 8, which is out of Africa hypothesis and evidence of African origin. So the curriculum is well abroad. It really tries to address those questions out there that really the sciences had to evolve through. And also the government adopted a strategy to just address the growth of paleoscience, the development of paleosciences. And the two goals that I highlighted was the one where they really wanted to teach South Africans about the paleosciences, and also the other one to just make South Africa a destination for paleotourism. But to look at the status quo right now, development of paleosciences is well and good. We have some wins, we have some challenges, funding being one of the limitations. But really, when you look at the structure of participation of several races and populations in paleosciences, we still have a long way to go regarding transformation and inclusivity in the field. Let's zoom in at Taung, looking at the research component. Taung experienced 5 major expeditions of research previously. The last one took place in 2012. And this way, they really produced a lot of materials that are now curated in institutions. At the moment, there haven't been any research expedition taking place in Taung. There is total silence regarding the research of the site. Even the permit holder, I could not ascertain the institutions that hold the permit holder for research activities in Taung. The site also experienced several outreach activities. The ones that really made an impact were the ones that took place in 2008 and also in 2015, where majority of the scholars were introduced through the human evolution topic, and they were also taken to the site, so that we just try to bridge this gap that exists between those scholars that have access to resources and those scholars in Taung that are probably regarded as being in the middle of nowhere. So these are just the pictures of the activities. We are looking at the infrastructure development at the site. It is quoted by government that so far we have spent about 500 million within developing the site. What will follow are just the pictures that are to follow. And the government was quoted recently committing to handing over the site to the community as early as September. I believe it is September this year, but because I'm in touch with majority of the management authorities, I believe September next year is something that will be probable. These are just the picture of the development. Remember, this used to be a mine compound. So the department has taken an initiative to use materials and also to renovate the buildings that are in existence. You can see the site, my pictures are a little bit, but you can see some of the site that are, the pictures showing the sites that were very, very dilapidated. And they have started with restoring the road that leads to one of the wetlands in the area. Then they have the picnic ablutions that they have really done a good job in restoring. They have restored the powerhouses that I think they have utilizing it for some of the activities within the surrounding population. And the manager's office, they have done. One thing that really stands out is the museum or the interpretive center that they want to open. It is at an advanced stage. We recently visited the site. The infrastructure is meticulous. What they need to do now is really to open the site and so it to be functional, because it does not help the site being like this where there is such big infrastructure yet no one is using it. Way forward, what should we do? Having noted the development, the challenges, I think when you have a site that really does not have much traffic, be it research-wise or visitor-wise, the best is to integrate its heritage development in the infrastructure plan of the town, and also resource allocation that should come from institutions of curating the fossils also from government. And one thing that I stresses that is still lacking is multi-stakeholder engagement. We see a lack of collaboration and partnership between the management authority and several institutions that are linked to the site. We see lack of community involvement and also public education about the site. So if we can really do this, I believe the site will really just prosper and benefit the research communities as well as the local people in the ground. In the interest of time, I'm just going to say thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Miriam. This was super fascinating, I'm sure, for the audience. So just a quick reminder to the audience to please submit questions as we will have a Q&A after the next presentation. Okay, so our next and final presentation for today before the Q&A is by Dr. Johannes Haile Selassie, who will talk about Lucy in the present.
All right. Well, thank you, Lauren. First, let me thank Ariel and the Leak Foundation and IH1 Past for putting together this interesting program, because this program is, as you've heard from the three speakers before me, about two of the most iconic specimens in the history of paleoanthropology. And as you've heard from the previous speakers, Lucy and Taung have significant contribution to our understanding of human origins. And the history of their discovery, of course, is a little bit different in terms of like the context that Taung was found in versus Lucy was found. So Lucy, when she was found in 1974, basically systematic paleoanthropology in Ethiopia wasn't that developed, and she was almost at the beginning of this effort in Ethiopia. But her discovery really attracted a lot of scientists to Ethiopia, and basically her discovery was very important because of the way the discoverer, Don Johansen, told the story of her discovery and what she meant to science. And what you're seeing on this slide are book covers, Lucy, the Beginning of Humankind, and also then another controversial bestseller of the same book, basically telling the story of Lucy's discovery in a way that the general public can easily understand it, is what really made Lucy like the name that, a household name that everybody knows about. But the scientific significance, as Denise mentioned earlier, was so much that it created a lot of controversy that is still shaping the way we understand human origins today. So basically, you've heard about the significance from the scientific perspective of Lucy, but what about other aspects of society, other aspects of local infrastructures and local scholars? This is what I would like to highlight. And when you hear about what I'm going to say in those areas, it might sound like a success story that Lucy was really significant in making a lot of changes, which is true. But at the same time, in the end, I think this is going to be part of the conversation we're going to have toward the end of the program, is that we do have similar issues as Taung's discovery in South Africa. So those are, I think, what we should probably highlight when we get to the discussion section. So the discovery of Lucy in Ethiopia, beyond science, meant a lot to the country, Ethiopia, where it was found. And Lucy became the pride of the country, and to the extent of the tourism logo being what you're seeing on this slide, land of origins. Of course, Ethiopia claims to be the land of origins for so many things, but this was basically inspired by Lucy, and you can imagine the impact it had on the Ethiopian communities. Even beyond that, internationally, the National Aeronautics and Space Association of the United States had a mission that went to Jupiter to study the Trojan asteroids around Jupiter, and they called it Lucy Mission. Now, the reason why they called it Lucy Mission is because Lucy is the specimen that gave us a lot of information about our origins. And this mission, NASA thinks that it will give us a lot of information about the origin of our solar system. So basically, you can see that her impact is beyond just paleoanthropology, and it has become like the emblem of origins. But Lucy also had impact on policy making. And this is really important because the Ethiopian Antiquities Law, before her discovery, did not really think about fossils because, as I said, paleoanthropological research in Ethiopia is relatively young. It started early in the 1960s. So as Denise said, Lucy did inspire extensive survey and exploration, especially in Eastern Africa, and this resulted in the discovery of so many specimens, not only from Ethiopia, especially Hadar, but also from other Eastern African sites. But specifically for Ethiopia, what happened in the late 1970s was because it did not have any laboratories to study fossils that were being collected from Hadar. So basically, there was no choice for the scientists but export all these fossils that were found from Hadar, which is what you're seeing on the right side, to Cleveland, Ohio, in the United States for further research. Now, when a lot of researchers started getting interested in working in the Afar region, the country realized that there has to be some kind of antiquities law that governs all these discoveries. And in the red here, you see that one of the articles in the proclamation talks about removing antiquities outside of the country. And it says, no antiquity may be taken out of Ethiopia without the approval of the Council of Ministers. Now it became really sensitive about its cultural heritage, about its antiquities, and how to control it. And this is one way that Lucy was like impactful in terms of making like policy changes in terms of how antiquities were administered in the country. We can also talk about her impact on paleoanthropological infrastructure. As I mentioned earlier, there were no laboratories until like the 1980s when we had so many fossils which were being exported out of the country for further research. It needed really a facility where the fossils could be stored and studied. And this is what ended up, that the government ended up building such a beautiful laboratory where we now have all the facilities that we need, like storage facilities, laboratory equipment, and even safes for the hominids. Now, this is an effort not just by the government, but also the various projects that were working in Ethiopia had to support with the storage facilities, with the laboratory equipment, and so forth. So basically, it garnered all of this effort, both from the government and also from the scientists, to build such a wonderful laboratory whose impact is not just for the present, but also for the future research that we're going to do in that country. The other thing is, when you think about paleoanthropology in the past, and this is also seen in South Africa, a lot of this scientific research was being done by foreigners. There were no African scholars involved in actual research. And this has been the case until recently. And one of the things, and I think this is why I think Lucy made a lot of impact on policymakers in Ethiopia, is because in addition to the new antiquities law, which prohibited exporting original fossils out of the country, they also added in any research applications that each researcher should think about training local scholars, right? So here is one of the articles which says, describe the proposed project's plan to train local scholars. So it became part of the effort that scientists have to also think about training local scholars when they're doing their research in the country. So all of this is like because of what was coming out, not only just Lucy, but also after Lucy, and it required the government to come up with those kinds of plans, which really resulted in the training of so many Ethiopian researchers, right? So we now have people from Ethiopia, researchers from Ethiopia, who are project leaders of their own. All of this red dots that you see are project areas where some of us have our own projects, right? So this is also credited to the discovery of Lucy and all the fossils that came after her discovery. And we have so many publications that are led by Ethiopian scholars. This is something that you wouldn't have seen like before the 1960s and 1970s. But now in the 21st century, a lot of Ethiopian scholars are publishing as lead authors in all of these prominent scientific journals that you see on this slide. We have the next generation of paleoanthropologists that are being trained at various places in the United States and also in Europe and elsewhere, including in some of our students are also in South Africa. And all of these local scholars are being supported by Leakey Foundation and PAST. And this is one of the things that I think I would want to highlight, that such foundations should be encouraged to do more and have more foundations like them to support local African scholars. And I think this is part of what we should discuss about moving forward in terms of developing African local scholarship. Unfortunately, the impact that Lucy had on local communities is not much. And this is a little bit of a sad story where local people, at least at the individual level, have some economic benefits because we hire them, they get some money. But as you can see on the right side, these are the kids from the local communities that we work with. They don't have classrooms to teach their kids, and whatever space they can find, that's what they use as classrooms. And this is something that we should really think about in the future, because now 50 years ago they were not asking about those kinds of questions, but now the local communities who live around these areas have started asking questions. What are we benefiting from the discovery of Lucy? What are we benefiting from the discovery of all these fossils that are coming out of the Afar region? So basically, I think the future of paleoanthropology is going to depend on how we answer their questions. If we cannot answer these questions for them to be satisfied with what, in terms of the benefits that they're getting, then that would be a big problem in terms of the continuity of the research that we're going to do. So hopefully, I think the community engagement, capacity building are some of the issues that are common, not only to Ethiopia and South Africa, but also to a lot of African countries with paleoanthropological resources. And I think this is what we should discuss about what are the way forward. What can we do collaboratively to solve those kinds of issues in each of those countries with paleoanthropological resources. And I think that's the last slide that I have, and I thank you all.
Thank you so much, Johannes. So informative. So just before we move on to the Q&A, the audience Q&A, I have a follow-up question for both you and Miriam. And this has got to do with kind of the scientific and cultural biases that, you know, the intersection with the discoveries of the Taung Child and Lucy, which was touched on by Dipuyo and Denise. So my question is, have these biases been addressed or have they been perpetuated today? And again, I know this is a huge question. We can, you know, carry it over to the panel discussion, but just a few sentences from each of you would be great. And we'll go with Johannes first.
Okay, cultural biases. Ethiopia is a highly religious country, and it's like mostly Christians and Muslims, but also there are other religions. But when you talk about biases, religion does not really impact like how people feel about like the fossil discoveries from Ethiopia, because as I mentioned in my talk, fossils are like considered as pride of the country. So a lot of the discussion that we're having right now about like local community engagement and the scientific involvement of local scholars, this is mostly a discussion among ourselves as scientists between like local scientists and international scientists. That's the kind of discussion that we have, and the biases are mostly like limited to those kinds of circles, but not for long, because as I said, now the local communities are being involved in the kind of research that we're doing, and they're asking questions. So that's probably where we're going to learn about additional biases in those situations.
Yeah, perfect. And Miriam?
Thank you. I think the scientific and cultural bias in South Africa are being addressed, but we are going at a slow pace. There is, when you look at the scientific platform, there is a little bit of inclusivity of those populations that were not yet included. And we are starting to include in communities, so that when we tell the story of science, we are looking at, we are cultural sensitive. Remember, when you are introducing a subject like this, like a subject of evolution to schools, we have to really mind several beliefs, as Johannes has just indicated. It is a slow progress, but we are definitely moving in the right direction. We just have to pick up the pace. And I remember Dipuo touched on how scientific data used to be collected previously by the previous researchers. So we are really conscious of several population beliefs in how we present the sciences of today. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam and Johannes. Okay, so as we've all been talking, we have received questions from the audience. And so we will be answering some of them now. And I see we are all on the screen. Yes. Okay, so we have question 1 by Satunuka. Thank you. Okay, so it's really interesting how both discoveries led to different scientific biases and the social and cultural impact it created. Do you think the teams that worked on it actually impacted the aftermath? I think let's do, should we do Dipuo?
The teams, and with regards to the discovery of the Taung, like I said, we're seeing Raymond Dart being the one who's being elevated as the one who did it. It didn't seem like a team effort, even though we are aware that it was actually more than one person. But the aftermath of how things happened, yes, definitely. Raymond Dart set the tone. He set the tone of how paleoanthropological research is conducted in South Africa, and I would like to believe that he actually set the tone of how it was conducted in the rest of Africa. So definitely there has been an impact in how we conduct the science, and it is only recently that we're trying to move away from some of those socio-culturally insensitive ways of doing science and being more inclusive, considering other issues that are now trending, issues like decoloniality and all that, but definitely they affected the aftermath.
Thank you, Dipuo. Does anyone else have a follow-up? Nope. Okay, we'll go to the next question. Okay, from Anita. Where is the skull currently located? Why wouldn't it stay in the country location it was found? So let's start with Taung. And okay, and Alison has a follow-up. So who has possession of the Taung skull, child skull now? So we'll start with Taung, and then we can move to Lucy. So this is about, I guess, ownership. Mr. Miriam.
Thank you. The skull is currently curated at the University of the Witwatersrand. It left Taung in 1924, as it has been reported. It has never went back. I remember now it is part of the heritage. How should I put this? It's part of the heritage estate of South Africa. It belongs to the country. It is managed under South African Heritage Resources Agency. So Wits University is actually just looking after the skull for the sake of South Africa. There has been questions of security for it to be returned back to Taung. Hence, the government has taken initiative in really building several security area that it can be curated there, whether it will go to Taung permanently or it will be in a rotation with agreement with Wits University. That is a discussion that is probably taking place between the management authorities of the Scarlet Taung, of the site at Taung, and the curating institutions, that is Wits University, and also including into the mix the South African Heritage Resources Agency, which is SARA. They are the ones that really do allow you what you should do, what you do not do regarding fossils materials in South Africa. So those stakeholders will probably have a discussion, or they are probably currently having a discussion. We will just await an announcement regarding that. Thank you.
Thanks, Miriam. And then I think we should talk about Lucy. So where's Lucy currently, and has there been issues with ownership? Let's do Johannes.
Okay. Lucy is currently in Ethiopia. She resides in one of the safes that I showed you on my slide, in the Hammond room in the laboratory. And basically, one of the articles in the Proclamation of Antiquities clearly states that antiquities, movable or immovable, are the property of the state and administered by the federal government. So the federal government seat is in Addis Ababa, the capital city. So all fossils we collect from all corners of the country, they come to Addis. They don't stay in the areas where they were, found. So she is safely in Addis, but as you all know, she's been traveling a lot in the past. She lived in Cleveland, Ohio for 5 years, and she was in Houston and other parts of the country, but now she is back at home, and there is a lot of resistance in terms of taking her out for exhibits and things like that, which is one of the things that seems the government to have understood right now. So they send like replicas for exhibits.
Perfect. Okay, we have another question. So what is the most significant change scientifically that has been learned about each fossil since their discovery? Let's do Denise. You can talk about maybe Lucy, and then we'll go to the Taung Child.
So Lucy, when she was discovered, so she was clearly bipedal, but she had these, she had long arms, her finger bones were curved and long. And so there was a lot of discussion on sort of how much time she spent in the trees. And so that was a huge scientific debate, and still is to a certain extent. But since the time that Lucy's been discovered, we found a lot of other fossils, right, of afferences. And probably one of the most informative ones is actually one found by Johannes and his team in World-Zamile, Karanumu. And this is also a very complete specimen, a partial skeleton, no head, unfortunately. But the information that Johannes and his team got from Karanumu made it very clear that that afferences really was this habitual biped, and that these arboreal sort of features that you might find in Lucy is probably more due to a primitive retention than actually like adaptations, because there's certainly like everything about Karanumu is very clearly a habitual biped that would have probably a relatively hard time in living and running around in the trees permanently.
Thanks, Denise. Okay, and then let's do the Taung Child. Puyo, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah. I think the question is what has been discovered since the announcement in 1924. I think people might not be aware that, or they might be aware that when it was discovered, there has never been any other fossil hominin discovery in Taung ever since 1924, 100 years later. And I think maybe it also links to what Miriam had just said, that there has not been a lot of excavations being taken in Taung that could be a factor of that, but also there has been some excavations and some different expeditions by different researchers, but there has not been any other. So that Australopithecus africanus specimen was the only one discovered within that whole region. And another interesting factor is in 1995, Professors Berger and Clark actually made an announcement that what they were seeing was that Taung skull, which was something that had never been discussed before, was that the marks, the marks in the skull looked like they were puncture marks, and they looked like they were impacted by a carnivore, and they were able to identify an eagle as the one that had caused the demise of the skull. And that could also be the reason why possibly we have not found any other any other fossil hominin in the region. It was probably the distance within which the eagle moved the skull away from its territory. So that basically that is what it is. There's not been a single other fossil hominin discovered in the region. The other hominin discoveries are actually far north in the Gauteng province, which is actually over 500 kilometers away. I think that is what is unique about the site.
Thank you, Dipuyo. Okay, I think we're going to do one last question. And just so that you know, because all these questions are amazing, we will be collecting all the questions and we'll try to get them answered in a blog post. So yeah, so your questions will eventually get answered. Okay, Okopi asks, why is there no focus on hominin evolution in places like West Africa? Is it because of the Lucy influence? I'm not too sure what the Lucy influence is, but I think Johannes maybe knows.
Okay, well, I can say that it's not the Lucy influence. Basically, our information, what we know about our origins, comes from the fossils that we're finding. And those findings come from Eastern Africa, South Africa, because some geological phenomena have allowed us to explore those ancient sediments that have been exposed because of tectonics, because of erosion, and all of these sediments happen to be in those parts of Africa. But it doesn't necessarily mean that these early human ancestors never lived outside that region. But there is no way that we can test that hypothesis because there are no sediments of similar age that are exposed in Western Africa. In fact, this is one of the questions that has become like, one of the major questions that paleoanthropologists are trying to address now. Why are we not looking for these fossils somewhere else, outside Eastern Africa, outside South Africa? But to do so, you have to find the right sediments at the right age, right? That's the only way we can check whether they actually lived outside where we're finding them now. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they did not live somewhere else outside Eastern Africa. So it's based on how much further, like survey and exploration we do, how lucky we are to find the sediments from the right age and see if whether they were there or not, if they're fossiliferous, right? But again, we cannot rule out that hominids never lived outside South Africa and Eastern Africa. It's all about like continuing the survey and exploration, finding new sites that are fossiliferous. And eventually, if somebody goes out to West Africa and does survey and exploration and finds like 5 million year old hominin, I would be so happy because that extends our knowledge of the biogeography of these ancient human ancestors, which we suspect might have been much wider than what we're seeing now based on the fossil record.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that insight. Yeah, I have heard about new expeditions in West Africa, so I think we should be looking out for any discoveries. But yeah, I'm sure. Thank you so much to the audience for those questions, as I said, and also to the speakers. I'm sure the audience is learning so much from everyone. Okay, so now it's time to move on to our final section of this program. And so we have discussed the historical context of each discovery, and we have learned about the impact of these discoveries in paleoanthropology and society today. But now we're going to turn to the future. And so this is going to be a sort of panel discussion. So what I'll do is I'll ask a number of questions that each speaker will have a chance to weigh in on. But I'm going to pick a different speaker to go first each time. So yeah, I'll pick on on one of you. So I'm going to begin with the following question, and I'm going to direct it to Miriam. And then, as I said, people can weigh in afterwards. So, Miriam, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the sort of colonial context of the discovery of the Taung Child, but also its now intersection with current decolonial efforts in science. This is brought up by Dipuyo. And you also touched on this a little bit in your presentation, but how do we kind of build bridges between local communities and the global scientific community? Because, part of decolonial efforts is to, do more public engagement and to build these bridges. So do you have any kind of ideas how to do that?
Thank you, Lauren. I think we need to educate the local communities about the discoveries that took place in their site. The majority of them do not even know what you mean when you are referring to a place as a heritage site. Others do not even know anything about the outstanding universal value. So we need to educate the community so that they take ownership about the site, so that they feel that pride, and also give them correct scientific information. Because when you listen to the information that the Taung communities, I'm going to use that as an example, they have about the Taung skull, there's several myths that goes around regarding the discoveries, regarding what it represents. Those are the narratives that we need to correct, so that even when there is research expeditions taking place, we also open ourselves to them to take that 5 minutes to educate them. And when they are educated and they feel that they are part of the ownership or the stakeholder metrics of the site, they will also start to be the ones that protect the site, that could make conservation mechanisms easier, because they are the first line of defense in the site. They are there every day. We go there once in 2 years. So education, public awareness, it's something that we really need to get quickly. We need to include them in the discussions. At the moment, we are leaving them behind. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. The kind of discussion is also, a two-way discussion, right? It's not just, us telling communities, it's also us, teaching, but also learning. And I think that is the way to go. Does anyone else have a Dipuyo?
Thanks, Lauren. I mean, when you talk about decoloniality, especially of the science, it's a case of where representation matters. We really need to harp on about inclusivity, inclusion into the scientific enterprise and the scientific process. I mean, when you're talking about decolonizing a science, you cannot be othering communities and putting them external to what is the process of what we call the science. So it is a question of ensuring that the community, the locals, the people who belong in those localities are part of the scientific process. If you're going in as an external person, how do you decolonize as an external with an external perspective? The process needs to be as inclusive as possible. This is where we're talking about equitable access, not only of the heritage, equitable access to the scientific process itself, meaning that we are talking about training, we're talking about let's get locals to be researchers as well. Let's get locals to be the next generation of professors, because a decoloniality process cannot exclude the people it's aimed at. So if you're going to practice decoloniality, you cannot be at the exclusion of the people that you're aiming it at, and you cannot come in as an external. So representation is very important, especially in a discipline like this, especially in the context of a country like South Africa. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Dipuyo. And Denise and Johannes, I wonder if you have any thoughts on kind of the Ethiopian context in this regard. Denise?
I think I'll just kind of speak more broadly about, just kind of follow by what DePoyle said, how like that structural change, in order to really create real access and to be part of the scientific process, the structural change is so important, right? And that starts very young, and it's a way broader question, I think, than paleoanthropologists ourselves as like a small group can address. Like this really requires buy-in on so many different levels from so many different people, from the government, right? And so I think part of it is thinking about what we can do within that ecosystem, that structure, to really start opening it up and start like advocating for this equitable access. And I don't have a really good answer to that, but I feel like this is a way that we as scientists and people who are really involved in this like need to start. You need to start really thinking about not just seriously, but also doing. Because thinking is easy, right? It's the doing part that's always a lot harder.
Absolutely. Thank you all for that. I'm going to move on to the next question because this is targeting Johannes first. And so, Johannes spoke about this in the presentation. So, paleoanthropology on the African continent has historically been dominated by foreign researchers. You do talk about, some progress in this regard today. But I was thinking more about sort of going forward in the future and specifically about best practices for fostering ethical international collaborations, because we still do have, of course, international researchers that work on the African continent, but maybe lessons for them, lessons for us all about ethical international collaborations.
Well, thank you, Lauren. That's very good question. At this stage in my career, I think about standards like of international collaboration, not just based on my experience in Ethiopia, but also based on experiences of other African scholars somewhere else as well, because we've been so siloed like to areas where we're working, and we try to set up like the standard ethics and everything like based on where we are. But what I'm seeing now is that each of those countries with a lot of paleoanthropological resources have different issues, different questions, different ethical considerations that we're not aware of unless we try to understand everything from all corners and try to bring them together and come up with some kind of a standard international ethical considerations that is applicable to all, right? Now, as a paleoanthropologist, most of my life and my research was in Ethiopia and is in Ethiopia. But I go to Kenya, I go to South Africa, I go to other places to study fossils, right? And I expect like some kind of similar standards almost everywhere that I go, because that's the only way you can do research. But have we ever had the opportunity to actually come up together and address all of our questions, all of our ethical concerns? That's something we haven't done. And right now, one of my efforts is to actually come up with a workshop to bring together all African scholars and also international scholars who work in Africa and try to address questions like ethics, questions like how do we promote like local scholarship, how do we support local institutions in terms of capacity building, and all of these questions which are common to all of us, like wherever you go, right? So my basic goal right now is something that has to do with this. And as a matter of fact, in last April, we had a symposium here in Tempe at ASU in the Institute of Human Origins to talk about Lucy's impact. And what we've done in the end is we had a small workshop, brought every scientist who came and who was interested, who had vested interest in African researchers and African institutions. We brought them together, and let's find out what the problems are, like what are our common goals moving forward. And now we're thinking about like bigger workshops where we can bring all of these international scientists, African scientists together and identify what shall we do moving forward. I think that is something that I'm going to pursue from now on and see if we can come up with like common ground, despite like the context, the differences in context that we're talking about. We need to come up to a common ground by working together, and that's my big goal right now.
Absolutely, yeah. Building networks across the African continent is key in this regard. Absolutely. Does anyone else have a follow-up to that? Okay, if not, we will move on to the next question. Dipuyo, this is for you. This is a big question, and I think everyone will have something to say about it. What does it take to grow African paleoanthropology?
So, Lauren, I could have the answer to that one. I think Africa's problems are bigger than what we're experiencing in paleoanthropology. I mean, however, when you look at what has been done in other countries, especially in the West, how those have been developed, you start with a multi-layered approach. What is important is the human resources. We need to develop human capital. We need to train. We need to train. That's the basis of development of a discipline. You need to train. From training, you need to create the jobs for those graduates. That is very important. In my previous life, people used to harp on about us providing, South African government is quite good at providing bursaries, but then within the discipline, we struggle then to retain those graduates within the discipline and provide them with the jobs to be able to occupy, to be able to undertake the research and to train the future generation. But also, what else do we require? Infrastructure development. I mean, how do you, this is paleoanthropology is a laboratory intensive discipline. You cannot do it without a laboratory. You cannot do it without some of the small, whether small, medium or large infrastructure that is required to undertake this discipline. So I think there are different layers to it, but if we can start with those basics, we would be getting somewhere, especially for, I mean, and I was very impressed to see Prof. Haile Selassie talking about this infrastructure development program that they undertook in Ethiopia. South Africa is not doing badly, however, we still have a long way to go. So to go African paleoanthropology, we need to look at those different layers. And the funny thing is, in South Africa, we have this beautiful strategy, the South African strategy for the paleosciences, that outlines exactly what needs to be undertaken. The problem is, where do the funds come from? We need to have, and this is also leads to the current discussion, in critical institutions such as your past, critical institutions such as your Leakey Foundation, which really have been the backbone for supporting of various facets of what I'm discussing. They support research, they support student training, they support funding, but they cannot do it alone. I mean, our governments need to come to the party as well. South Africa does try, and I'm saying that as a former government employee myself, that South Africa, we're not doing that badly in comparison. However, it's not sufficient. It is not sufficient. We need to plow into development of such disciplines, especially if they've been identified as national priority. In South Africa, paleosciences has been identified as a national priority, but if we're not going to elevate its funding at a priority level, I mean, if we just at strategic level, we claim for it to be a national priority. However, when we provide support, we don't give it the same status. I mean, those policies, those legislations that we pass become futile. So we need to fund. We already have the policies. We already have great legislation which protects our heritage. Let's fund for all these different layers. And I'm sure I can go on the whole day about what is required, but the basis, infrastructure and human capital development are the basis of how we can grow paleoanthropology in Africa.
Absolutely, Dipuyo. I mean, talking about funding programs, like I was the recipient of a Baldwin fellowship, which is a Leakey Foundation fellowship that supports, the training of PhD training for, people who come from countries with limited opportunities. And that was kind of, that started my career. And past, I was also the recipient of past funding. And funding programs are key in this regard. Does anyone else have any follow-up? Nope. So I think we all.
I think Dipuyo basically framed it so well that there is no need for us to like jump in and add to it, because everything she said, I think everyone agrees with and sees in me, right? Infrastructure is crucial, both people and things, right? Buildings. But we always get stuck at the funding, always, no matter where we go.
Yep, absolutely. um,
I think what she actually mentioned, Rupio mentioned about retention. Like you train students, and then they have masters or a PhD, but they don't have job opportunities. So basically, what does that mean to the next generation of researchers that you're trying to recruit, right? If somebody before me graduated and got a PhD or a master's degree in paleoanthropology but doesn't have a job, do you think I'm gonna go to study paleoanthropology? No, no. But again, is this something that individual researchers can actually resolve as permanently? Some of these issues have to do with like actions that need to be taken by governments, like the country's governments. But we can try our best to put a lot of pressure on those governments in terms of what they should do if they want their country to be like the leading country in paleoanthropological research. So there is some portion of our responsibility that can help with like lobbying, like uh, government officials to actually support those kinds of things. But I think that's really, really a serious problem that we're going to face going forward.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, governments need to be funding or pushing funds into developing programs at universities, for sure. I also believe that. We are running out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a final question and get just a little answer from each of you. This is kind of a very general question, just to wrap us up. But what does the commemoration of 50 years of Lucy and 100 years of Taung mean to you? And we'll start with, let's do Miriam first.
Thanks, Lauren. I think just commemorating these two specimens that really contributed so much to the discussion, that is so magnificent, the discussion of human origins. It indicates that really we do take our heritage seriously. We do acknowledge the scientific evolving mechanisms that we have really undergone. Remember, previously, even as a topic of evolution was something that you could not speak of. We know the histories, even the discoveries of Taung, the challenges that it experienced from some of the scientific platforms. So for us to acknowledge the information that it provided with Lucy, I think the one main one that they really acknowledge is the evidence of bipedalism that really it presented us. And to me, that is becoming human. So we ought to really just acknowledge that they started a discussion that maybe going forward, we will have even more to add on. Africa has given us several specimens that really expanded on the discussion, but we are not having these discussions enough. We are really not reaching out to even government officials. We are saying we need to lobby for them to support the sciences. Are we teaching them the sciences? What will they be supporting? That's also a discussion that we need to have. We have good policies, we have good legislature in place, but the policy makers, do we educate them? What do we mean about hominid and fossils? Dupuy can attest that we've had several media coverage where the context from senior decision makers was very, very incorrect regarding what do these fossils represent. So we ought to really educate our public official bearers about the sciences, and we need to invite them to discussions like this, that really Africa has given plenty to the scientific community, evidence that we cannot really dispute. So I believe these two specimens ought to be celebrated. There was one researcher who once believed that every school in South Africa should have a cast of Taung Child and a cast of Mrs. Place. Maybe that's something we need to really to take across. Maybe every school in Africa should have a cast of Lucy, a cast of Mrs. Place, and a cast of the Taung Child. Then we would say we really are celebrating and commemorating the information they have blessed us with. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. I think we have time for just a quick sentence from everyone else, if you'd like to weigh in on what this means to you. Let's do Denise.
I think just how far we've come from the time that Taung was discovered, and the knowledge we've gathered. I mean, it's amazing, right? 100 years since then. Think about all that we accomplished in learning about our origins. We do genetic DNA now. We understand sort of how humans and that modern humans originated in Africa, and that that this departure of humans from Africa, encountering different environments, is a lot of what sort of dictates the differences we see physically, right? And a lot of these sort of populational level differences that we see is due to that. And so I just think it's incredible, right? In 100 years, we went from this little tiny skull to what we know today.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well,
Johannes.
all I want to say is, okay, so the celebration of the 100th anniversary of Taung and 50th anniversary of Lucy should start a new era in paleoanthropology, an era where we solve our problems and issues together, we celebrate our accomplishments together, and we begin an era of data sharing, collaboration, being the norm in paleoanthropology. Okay, so those are like what I hope we'll see in the next 50 to 100 years in paleoanthropology.
Thanks, Johannes. And the Puyo.
Lauren, for me, 100 years of the discovery of Taung means I look at a panel like this and I feel like being a Black South African, I should be one of those people who are living our ancestors' wildest dreams. Raymond Dart, those characters that I mentioned who were part of the narrative of the discovery of the Taung skull would have never imagined to have a Dipuo Kgotleng being part of the discussions about their discoveries. So I feel like we have come such a long way that we should keep on creating a better path for the future and for future generations. We should get to a point where inclusivity is not even a discussion anymore. Equitable access to the heritage is not even a discussion. So that is what it means to me, and that is what I hope for the next generation. When my kids come on board to be the next paleoanthropologists, they should, that this should not even be a discussion. But I feel like we've come a long way, and they have charted the path, they have laid the foundation, but we've done so much better than our predecessors, and we should even do better to create a better future for the future generations.
Thank you so much, Dipuyo. That is the perfect moment for me to wrap up this amazing event. I would like to thank our speakers, of course, for their time and for this really wonderful discussion. I feel like we could have spoken for 5 hours. Thank you to our viewers for your excellent questions and for tuning in. Thank you also to our sponsors, as well as the Leakey Foundation, PAST, and the IHO. And be sure to check out the amazing work these organizations do to learn more. And we have shared some links, I think. So yeah, have a lovely rest of your day, wherever you are in the world. And yeah, that's it. Goodbye.